Everything Bertha Russell has built, every favor, every gala, every whispered promise could come crashing down in a single moment. And the only person who can save her now? Marian Brook? The woman Bertha once dismissed as powerless. But power is shifting in New York, and desperation can drive even the proudest to do the unthinkable. In episode 7 of Gilded Age Season 3, something shocking happens. Bertha Russell begs. Asterisk before the candlelight flickered over clenched fists and desperate eyes. There was control. Cold, glittering control. Bertha Russell did not climb the social ladder by asking politely. She climbed it by bulldozing through closed doors and daring anyone to stand in her way. For 2 seasons, we've watched her fight tooth and nail for a place among the old money elite. We've seen her build an opera house when she wasn't allowed into theirs. We've seen her throw grand balls so lavish they made even the most stubborn socialites turn their heads. But all of that, every polished diamond and stitched hem, it's always been about one thing: acceptance. Bertha Russell doesn't just want power. She wants to be belonged to. She wants the same respect people give Agnes Van Ryn simply for being born, and now, after years of climbing, the peak is starting to crumble beneath her. In the early moments of episode 7, the tone is already different. The camera lingers longer. The halls of the Russell mansion seem quieter. The maids speak in hushed voices. Something is brewing. Rumors of a scandal begin to whisper through Fifth Avenue. Perhaps a business deal of George's has gone wrong. Or maybe it's something more personal, something Bertha can't control. And suddenly, the invitations stop coming. The carriages no longer line up in front of her house. Her name isn't on the guest list. That's when we see the first crack. Bertha, standing at the window, watching a carriage pass by, one that should have been stopping at her door. It doesn't, and she doesn't say a word, but her silence is louder than any outburst. For a woman who has always acted with certainty, she now looks unsure. Meanwhile, Marian Brook has been living a quieter life. She still carries herself with the same gentle dignity she always has, but something about her has changed too. She's been tested. She's made choices. She's no longer the naive girl who arrived in New York not knowing which fork to use. She's seen how society works, and more importantly, she's seen who it hurts. So when Bertha hears that Marian is being welcomed into circles she can no longer reach, a plan begins to form. It's risky. It's humiliating. But Bertha has never been afraid of risk. Only one thing terrifies her: being forgotten. And that brings us to the unthinkable moment, a moment no one ever thought they'd see. Bertha Russell, head held slightly lower, walking alone through a quieter part of town, heading toward Marian's modest home. Every step is heavy, not just with pride, but with something she rarely shows need. But why Marian? Why now? And what, exactly, does Bertha want from her? We'll get to that. But first, let's go back to where the thread began to unravel, piece by piece. Because this fall didn't happen overnight. Asterisk, it didn't start with a scandal. It started with silence. It's the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't warn it, just arrives, slow and creeping, like a fog through marble halls. At first, Bertha thought it was a scheduling mistake. A missed dinner invitation here. A delayed reply there. The usual snobbery from women who pretended not to notice her rise. But when her name was left off the guest list for Mrs. Astor's charity soiree and replaced with Marian Brook's, that silence became a message. And it was loud. Behind the scenes, whispers were swirling. George Russell's rail interests had taken a hit. A minor derailment. A drop in shares. Nothing that should have mattered. But in New York society, perception is everything. Once people smell weakness, they circle like crows. Suddenly, Bertha's place at the table wasn't guaranteed anymore. And the people she thought were allies, the same socialites who once begged her for opera seats, were turning their faces just slightly at luncheons, pretending not to see her. It was a quiet betrayal, but the kind that cuts deeper than any insult. She tried to act unfazed. She threw another event. A winter ball at the mansion, gilded in silver and lit with over 2,000 candles. But half the names on the RSVPs didn't show. And the ones who did? They left early. She stood at the top of her grand staircase that night, surrounded by beauty, drowning in it. But no one was really there, not the way she needed them to be. It was her worst fear realized, being visible, yet irrelevant. Meanwhile, Marian Brook, with her quiet grace and old family name, had begun to move through doors that Bertha had spent years trying to pry open. She was seen as authentic, pure, the type of woman New York society liked to polish and parade. She wasn't trying to take Bertha's place. She didn't even want it, but somehow that made her even more dangerous. She was gaining influence by simply being. Bertha hated that. It's not because Marian did anything wrong, but because she reminded Bertha of everything she could never be. Natural, effortless, accepted without war. But Bertha was never the type to lie down and take a blow. When the world tightens its grip, she sharpens hers. She called in favors. She tried to corner Marian at a museum opening, but the young woman left before she arrived. Bertha was left standing beside an empty seat, pretending not to care. Days later, the blow finally landed. A major social committee one Bertha had sponsored from the ground up replaced her with Marian, not as a member, as the chair. That was the final signal, a clear one. The world was moving on, and it wasn't taking Bertha with it, so she did the one thing she swore she never would. She wrote to Marian. Not through a servant, not through her secretary. In her own hand, it was not a letter full of threats. It was simple, direct, almost humble. It read, "Would you meet with me? Would appreciate the time." There was no signature, no title, just ink and white paper and something Bertha hadn't shown in years, vulnerability. But what does she truly want from Marian? A favor? A cover-up? Or something deeper, something tied to her own sense of identity? The meeting is coming. And when it happens, New York may never be the same. Asterisk, some doors are never meant to open, not because they're locked, but because what's behind them changes everything. When Marian Brook opened the door to her modest parlor that gray afternoon, she wasn't expecting her. Not Bertha Russell, not in that hat, not with that face. No pearls, no gloves, no entourage. Just a woman standing in the rain like a secret she never wanted to tell. Marian didn't speak right away, neither did Bertha. The silence between them was thick, shaped by every sharp glance, every social insult. Every time Bertha treated her like a girl from yesterday's world. But now, here she was. Today's world crashing in around her. Bertha didn't sit down immediately. She stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped like she was trying to hold her pride together. Marian, always graceful, offered tea, but even that gesture felt like a power shift. Bertha wasn't used to being served in someone else's home, especially not by someone she once dismissed as irrelevant. Finally, Bertha spoke, not in her usual commanding tone. Not the woman who once orchestrated entire seasons with a raised brow. Her voice was quieter now, controlled. But underneath her, she didn't apologize. That would be too far. But she did acknowledge the obvious. "I've come here because... ... I don't know who else I can speak to," she said. And just like that, the balance tipped. Bertha Russell, queen of facades, had stepped into honesty. What followed was not a demand, not a scheme. It was something worse. A request. Bertha told Marian about a growing issue, one that had been kept from the papers, from the socialites, even from George. A financial entanglement, a misplaced investment, and a woman, someone high in society, spreading rumors that threatened to destroy her. Standing entirely, she needed Marian's help. Not money, not influence. Something rarer, she needed Marian's reputation. Bertha explained that if Marian would vouch for her, show herself beside her at just one upcoming event, the rumors might die. People might believe things were fine. Marian trusted, quiet, unimpeachable. Marian still believed in the Russells, and that's when the real tension began. Marian listened, but she didn't agree. She didn't disagree either. She simply asked a question. Why me? Bertha didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved to the window. The rain hadn't stopped. Her voice softened again. Because people believe you, even when you say nothing. That admission may have been the most honest thing Bertha Russell had ever said. For a moment, the room felt still, like history was being written with every breath. But Marian had more questions. And Bertha wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone she once overlooked. The meeting was far from over, but something had already changed. The woman who once ruled New York with diamonds and defiance was now standing on shifting ground, hoping someone else could steady it. Marian held the power now, and Bertha knew it. But what will Marian do with it? Power doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it's dropped in your lap like a burning coal end. The world watches to see if you flinch, Marian. Brooke didn't ask to be important. She never campaigned for influence. She never played the game. But that's what made her different. And in New York, different becomes valuable because it can't be bought, as Bertha Russell sat across from her. Stripped of armor, Marian felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Control, and it didn't feel like victory. It felt like pressure, heavy and sudden. The offer wasn't simple. Yes, Bertha wanted her public support. A gesture, subtle appearance together at an upcoming charity gala. One photograph. One shared conversation. It's all it would take. To silence the whispers, Bertha couldn't fight on her own. But Marian knew it was more than that. She wasn't just being asked to stand beside a woman with a bruised ego. She was being asked to restore an empire with her silence, her smile, her presence. And with that came risk. Because while the city might admire Marian's quiet strength, it also watches her closely. One wrong step. One misplaced alliance, and the same society that had embraced her could just as easily pull away. Her aunt, Agnes, would disapprove. Loudly, society would talk. The women who toasted her name would raise their eyebrows. And somewhere deep down, Marian wondered if this was how Bertha had felt years ago. On the outside, trying to claw her way in. For the first time, Marian saw Bertha not as a threat, not as an obstacle, but as a mirror. A reflection of what it cost to be seen. Still, there was another thought. One she couldn't shake. What if helping Bertha wasn't just a risk but a mistake? What if this wasn't a fall from grace, but a cover-up for something darker? Bertha had always played her cards close to her chest. What if Marian was being used not as a savior but as a shield? The room felt colder now, the tea untouched, clock ticking louder. Marian looked at Bertha, who now sat motionless, not pleading, not demanding, just waiting. And in that moment, Marian realized something strange. Bertha wasn't afraid of losing money or status. She was afraid of fading, becoming irrelevant in a world she once ruled. This wasn't about saving face. It was about survival. Still, Marian couldn't decide. Not yet. She asked Bertha for time, for space to think. She would give an answer at the end of the week. That's all she could offer. Bertha nodded. A slow, tight nod. She stood. No goodbyes. No sharp words. Just a glance. Glance that said she knew what it cost to ask and what it would cost if Marian said no. When the door closed behind her, Marian stood in silence. Because sometimes, power isn't in the asking. It's in the pause between the answer and now. All of New York waits to see which way that silence breaks. Asterisk, New York has a memory longer than its skyline and a voice softer than a sigh. It never shouts, whispers, and when it whispers, everyone listens even when they pretend not to. By the morning after Bertha's quiet visit to Marian Brook, the city was already stirring, not with facts but with fragments. A carriage spotted on a quiet street, maid who noticed unfamiliar shoes near a humble parlor, a florist who prepared an unusually modest bouquet under the Russell name. Nobody said Bertha's name aloud, not yet. But her shadow moved across conversation like a storm behind stained glass. The same women who once bowed their heads at her table now lifted their chins when speaking of her, carefully, conditionally. They didn't need proof. Just possibility something had changed. That was enough to reopen the game. In society, timing is everything. So when Marian appeared at an art lecture later that week, alone but composed, all eyes were on her. Some watched with curiosity, others with caution. But every glance held one question. Was she going to protect Bertha, ... or let her fall? Marian noticed it, of course. The longer stares, the shorter conversations, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. For someone who had always stood just outside the political edge of New York's elite, she now felt herself being pulled toward the center, whether she wanted to be or not. She hadn't made a decision yet, but society was already drawing conclusions. Back at the Russell mansion, Bertha waited, not pacing. That wasn't her style. She waited with control, erecting the household as usual, planning menus, inspecting fabric swatches, but her mind was elsewhere. Each day that passed without word from Marian tightened the air around her. Her staff walked softer, her tone grew sharper. George asked if something was wrong. She told him no, but the truth sat between them like an unopened letter. Meanwhile, the very event Bertha hoped to use as her lifeline, the charity gala, was closing in. A week away, the final guest list being sealed. And Bertha's name, for the first time in years, was not printed at the top. She wasn't uninvited. Not exactly, she was unacknowledged. That was worse. Because in the Gilded Age, silence is not the absence of recognition. It is the announcement of exile. And still, Marian waited, because her choice was not simple. To accept Bertha's request would mean throwing herself into the fire. But to refuse could destroy a woman who, for all her faults, had fought harder than anyone for her place at the table. The city didn't care about the morality behind her choice. It cared only about what she would do, because in New York, reputation is a currency that spends faster than gold. And now, both women were teetering on the edge of its collapse. The question wasn't whether Bertha would survive without Marian. The question was whether Marian would survive with her. Asterisk, there are nights in New York when the chandeliers flicker differently. When every carriage wheel on cobblestone feels like a drumbeat. When the city forgets its noise and listens to footsteps, to entrances, to silence before applause. This was one of those nights. The charity gala at the Van Allstein estate wasn't just another social function. It was the event, the one designed to define the season. Attendance wasn't optional. It was currency. Appearance was allegiance, and absence was a statement inside. The ballroom gleamed with polished silver and anticipation. Music floated beneath the crystal chandeliers, and laughter danced carefully across marble floors. But beneath every painted smile was one burning question. Would she come? Not Bertha. Marian? Would Marian Brook walk in beside Bertha Russell? Would she lend her grace, her unshakable dignity, her power of public perception, to a woman so many had begun to quietly abandon? The seat beside Bertha's was still empty. It sat like a question mark, dressed in velvet. Bertha stood alone, flawless as ever, wrapped in green silk-like armor. But even silk can't hide a woman who knows she's being measured. Conversations dimmed when she passed. The space around her widened slightly, not enough to be rude, but enough to be noticed. She didn't flinch. Not once, but her eyes moved. To the entrance more than once, George was at her side, but distant. His business troubles were growing. Oh, their empire was trembling at the edges, and Bertha knew it. Tonight was her one chance to anchor it, to make the world believe they were still untouchable. Still ... She waited, and then it happened. The hush wasn't spoken, it spread, like perfume through air. Heads turned. Fans stilled in mid-motion. Even the orchestra missed a note. Marian Brook had arrived. Not loud, not grand, but present and not alone. She entered with intention. Her dress was simple, but elegant. Ivory silk, no jewels, hair pinned in a way that said, "I don't need the crown, I was born with the blood." She didn't look at Bertha right away. She simply walked the length of the ballroom, past whispers, past women who didn't know whether to curtsy or confront her. She reached the empty chair and stopped. Bertha turned. The moment froze, and Marian ... sat. No words were exchanged. They weren't needed because, in this city, Some choices don't echo. They thunder without a sound. Gasps were swallowed. The entire balance of social power had shifted not through force, but through posture. One woman, choosing to stand beside another, not for love, not even for friendship, but for something else, recognition. Tonight, the Russells weren't redeemed. They were remembered. Marian Brook became more than a social darling. She became something much rarer, a woman who decided what mattered. But what comes after such a moment, when the music resumes and the world pretends nothing has changed? When, in truth, everything has. Morning in New York doesn't wash things clean. It only sharpens the edges. By dawn, word of Marian's gesture had swept through every drawing room, breakfast parlor, and gossip column. Not through headlines, through murmurs. Through gloved hands covering whispers and sideways glances exchanged over porcelain cups. Marian Brook had taken a side, and everyone knew it. Some called it bold, others foolish. A few called it exactly what it was: dangerous. Agnes Van Ryn, stone-faced at the breakfast table, didn't mention it by name. She didn't have to. Her silence was sharp enough too. Slice marmalade. She simply placed the paper down, refused toast, and retired to her sitting room without a word. Marian felt it. The quiet judgment, the weight of it. She had chosen not just a woman, but everything that woman represented. Power, ambition, calculation, and in doing so, she had declared herself something new, no longer neutral across the city. Bertha Russell moved through her home with a different kind of grace, still composed, still crisp, and there was something softer at the edges, less armor, and more breath. She hadn't won back her empire, not yet. But she had secured a symbol. And symbols in this world matter more than fortunes. Her staff stood taller that morning. The invitations, at least some of them, began to arrive again. The tide was turning, slowly, deliberately. Bertha, sharp as ever, knew exactly what. That meant the game was back on. But here's what no one said out loud. Marian had given Bertha something far greater than a seat at a gala. She had given her time to recover, time to strategize, time to rebuild. But time, once given, cannot be reclaimed. And Bertha, she had given nothing in return, not yet. That's the thing about Bertha Russell. She never forgets a favor, a debt. And while Marian may have offered grace without condition, Bertha's world doesn't run on kindness. It runs on leverage. Behind the velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers, the balance of power had shifted once more. Not toward Bertha, not toward Marian, but between them. Because now they were tied, quietly, irrevocably. And whatever comes next, whichever house rises or falls, their names will be spoken in the same breath. Not as rivals, but as co-conspirators. In survival, the Gilded Age doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with glances. It's with names on lists. With one woman sitting beside another, knowing that nothing in this city is ever free, and as Marian steps back into the world she's helped hold up, and Bertha reclaims her place with steadier hands, one truth remains: power isn't taken in. New York, it's borrowed. And eventually, someone always comes to collect.